Alright, so in this series of videos I aim to do the impossible. I'm going to read the Horus Heresy series from start to finish in chronological order. And I don't mean book to book, I mean story to story. So all the Primarch novels, the anthology stories, all that sort of stuff, all in chronological order, or best as I can ascertain, and then hopefully work away all the way up to the Siege of Terror. So obviously this is an absolutely Goliath task as it is, so I've had to set down just sort of a few rules just to keep me on track. So I will be primarily focusing on the Black Library publications, so avoiding stories within the gaming supplements and White Dwarf, etc. I do reserve the right to change my mind if it is something that I specifically want to talk about, but the focus is going to be mostly be on the Black Library publications. As mentioned, I will be reading story to story, so it's not going to be paragraph to paragraph, so that we can kind of like keep some semblance of a narrative. And so a flashback that occurs in one story will still be read within that story, not out of sequence where it would occur in the timeline. But a story within an anthology book will be read in the chronological order, rather than me reading the whole book, as the anthology stories are mostly self-contained stories, not part of one bound narrative. So secondly, please understand that I'll be doing my best to read this in chronological order, but as I understand, a lot of these books, the stories occur all over the place. Some of them happen simultaneously, some of them it's not quite clear when exactly they occur, so I believe, the word chronological can be somewhat ambiguous and subjective when we're talking about it in terms of a Warhammer timeline. With this in mind, I'm open to a sort of a respectful, you missed a story that should have gone here, but for the most part this is more about talking about the stories in a start to finish chronological narrative sense, rather than trying to find a definitive timeline. If I do get something wrong or something doesn't make sense, just blame warp shenanigans, it's fine. Thirdly, for the most part this won't be like a book club sort of dissection of the story itself and the author's work. It's more about kind of like summarising the lore within the book and how it kind of feels in a narrative sense, looking at it from a chronological perspective. Most of my experience with the Horus Heresy has been second-hand, so it's been through, little excerpts in supplementary books, through content creators and summaries online. So while I know an amount about what's going on, it's an entirely different experience to read and engage with these stories themselves. So for the most part, I'll be going into these stories blind. Alright, with that out of the way, let's get on with it. So the earliest book I could find in the timeline is the fan favourite, Valdor, Birth of the Imperium by Chris Wraight. Really enjoyed this book. I think as a starting point to the Horus Heresy, there's not a lot of prerequisites of knowledge required to enjoy it, although I will say it certainly enhances the book and the characters, especially when it allows you to sort of put certain ideals into context of the wider world, vaguely knowing where it's all heading. So this is set on Terra in the year M30. The Emperor is at the tail end of his unification wars, with the majority of the planet now under his rule. All the major battles are now done. There's just a few sort of little odd jobs and things just left to do on the planet, really, just a bit of cleaning up to do. What are the unification wars? It's the Emperor's campaign to unite the planet Earth, Terra, under his ideals. Up until this point, the people of Terra had sort of split themselves into warring states of techno-barbarians, or small civilizations which are living under the constant threat of their neighbours. Basically, it's a savage Wild West, but on a planetary scale. Throughout the 29th millennium, the Emperor pretty much succeeded in bringing the planet under his newly formed government. A little forward into the 30th millennium, the Imperium is beginning to take shape. The people are getting somewhat organised. There's a semblance of law and order and administration and politics and all the good things that come with that sort of stuff. In this new world order, we are introduced to the character of Uoma Kandawire, one of the first considered to be a High Lord of Terra, so a big name and what would be considered to be one of the most sort of powerful political positions within the Imperium. Specifically, Kandawire is a High Provost Marshal, the person in charge of enforcing the law. She's Commissioner Gordon of the planet. Kandawire is in the process of an investigation. After finding evidence of a battle in which the planet's standing army known as the Thunder Warriors are seeming sort of impossibly exterminated, Kandawire is basically trying to find out what happened, who did it, who's responsible, and bring them to account under the law, the Emperor's law. She's just doing her job, she's seeking justice. What is a Thunder Warrior? Thunder Warriors are genetically engineered super soldiers created by the Emperor for the sole purpose of uniting humanity. It's important to note these are not Space Marines, more of a prototype Space Marine. Huge in stature, these are absolute brutes at around 8 foot tall, and built like Arnie in his prime if you fed him 4 more Arnies in his prime. Commanders of their ranks are confusingly referred to as Primarchs, and usually the only difference the Primarchs have over their brethren is their rank and maybe a few additional skills, but nothing that sets them apart too much. These Thunder Warriors were considered unstable and unreliable. There were numerous reports of them becoming feral or even just spontaneously dying. But despite this, they were still awe-inspiring warriors, and it was largely down to their efforts that the Emperor actually managed to unify the Earth. Without them, he certainly wouldn't have been able to do it, or not as easily. But either way, it was kind of very clear that they were not a long-term solution for peacekeeping. Kandawai's investigation brings her to the Imperial Palace, a still expanding continent-sized building, if you can call it that. It's built on top of the now flattened Himalayan mountains, or in world referred to as the Himalaysians. Kandawai believes the culprit responsible for the massacre is within the palace, and currently within the palace sits Captain General Constantin Valdor of the Legio Custodes. The Legio Custodes are the personal guard of the Emperor himself, also genetically engineered super soldiers, but perfect. Each one handcrafted by the Emperor himself, painstakingly nurturing each one's transition from a small baby to grown adult. Each one of these guys and girls is a one-man army. There's a passage within the book from a point of view character where he watches one of these guys just kick a tank over. So aside from their Super Saiyan strength, they also have extremely sharp minds and are suited up with the best armour and weapons the Emperor can provide. Standing at around 10 foot tall and being genetically stable, these guys are pinnacle humans, but also super difficult and time consuming to make even one, so just not suited for large scale conquests. Constantin Valdor is the captain, and even as Custodes go, he's a cut above even them. The others are Saiyans. Valdor is Goku, but with absolutely no humour. Under the extent of the law, the Emperor's law that he put in place, Kandawai demands an interrogation of Valdor, which, to her surprise, she's granted. Despite being massively intimidated by even his mere presence, she manages to conduct the interrogation, in which Valdor provides blunt yet cryptic answers to her questions. He does reveal that the Thunder Warriors were a danger to themselves and humanity in the long run, before then telling Kandawai her time is up, giving her no solid answers to what actually happened, who's responsible, or if it even happened in the first place. Kandawai becomes increasingly frustrated, and after a second interrogation, she's had enough and believes she has enough evidence to ascertain who the culprit is. Kandawai, now certain that it is indeed Valdor and his Custodes that are responsible for the massacre of the Thunder Warriors, enacts a coup on the Imperial Palace in order to take control of the capital and place Valdor under arrest. Surprisingly, a small team of surviving Thunder Warriors turn up, including their leader, Primarch Ushotan, which is revealed that they had already told Kandawai who was responsible, and Kandawai was just trying to collect evidence, just doing her job, following the law, the Emperor's law. She also at this point believes the Emperor has betrayed and undermined the laws that he himself has put into place by sanctioning the action and basically planning to go ahead and do whatever he wants with none of the democracy the people were promised. And to this end, she also plans to bring the Emperor to justice. Throughout and prior to the story, Kandawai has had a contact on the inside of the palace, a name you might partially recognise, one Ammar Astarte. Ammar Astarte is the director of the Emperor's biotechnical division, a scientist currently working on the tail end of the Space Marine project, a project designed to replace the Thunder Warriors. However, Astarte has become disillusioned by the project, after having her concerns repeatedly dismissed, and by this point the loss of the Primarchs, who were the genetic templates and meant to be leaders of the Space Marines, as well as considering the Primarchs to be an important factor in stabilising the Space Marines, she had become to believe the project a failure and doomed to be a repeat of the Thunder Warriors, if not worse, due to the idea of a large-scale and interplanetary deployment. To this end, Ammar Astarte simultaneously attempts to destroy the labs underneath the Imperial Palace during Valdor's arrest and put an end to the Space Marine project. Ammar had also secretly seeded her own personal forces within the palace, called the Castellan Exemplars. Posing as loyal subjects, they went unnoticed until it was time to strike. Kandawai and Astartes, thinking they're very clever, put their plan into action, with Kandawai basically knocking on the front door, escorted by her small team of Thunder Warriors and Exemplar Castellans. It's a sure win, right? Valdor finally reacts, mobilising his teeny tiny force of custodies to purge the palace of the rebels. He also orders a custodian called Simonus to confront Ammar Astartes, who was not only looking to destroy the labs, but also purge all of the research data and any information on the Primarchs, meaning that the project could not be recreated. Meanwhile, Valdor plods out to deal with Kandawire. When the two come face to face, Kandawire attempts to arrest Valdor, to which Valdor just stands there and Ushitan begins to laugh. It then becomes clear that this is a last stand for the Thunder Warriors, and Valdor is here to finish the job. But even as powerful as Valdor is, soloing a force of Thunder Warriors and Castellans is a big job. So, out of the smoke, and to a sick guitar number appear the first publicly utilised force of Space Marines. Clad in grey armour and standing around 7 foot tall, the Space Marines and Valdor strike against the rebels. Meanwhile, Simonus catches up to Ammar in a surprisingly action-packed cat and mouse involving Super Mario wall jumping and Ammar utilising some crazy technology in an attempt to level the odds while she completes her work. Eventually, Simonus succeeds in subduing Ammar, but he fails to stop her detonating explosives that destroy the labs and all the data held there. The explosion kills Ammar and grievously wounds Simonus. The battle above rages on, with Kandawire completely out of her element as the aged, portly woman in a big puffer jacket desperately tries to stay alive and get out of the thick of it. The Space Marines begin to overwhelm the physically larger and stronger Thunder Warriors. It's a really cool scene. It describes how the Space Marines fight in one of their first engagements. It goes into how, they're not quite refined yet, they're very inexperienced, but it also details how they seem to be learning and adapting very quickly as well. It's also worth noting here that the power of the Thunder Warriors is also really on show. It takes about 4 Space Marines to take down 1 Thunder Warrior. Then of course you have Valdor, who's just flicking enemies off him, and then steps up for his boss fight, which is Valdor versus Ushitan. It's an interesting and insightful fight. Ushitan goes into the fight fully expecting to die, and I get the impression Valdor kind of holds back on him for a little while. And I say this because during the fight they converse, and it becomes apparent that Valdor has a form of respect for the Thunder Warriors and the service that they provided for the Emperor. I think deep down, while he genuinely agrees that the Thunder Warriors had to go for the betterment of humanity and for the Emperor's plan, he also recognises that they deserve better than the hand they were dealt. It's also interesting that during the fight, Ushitan brings up his people's replacements, the Space Marines, and when he of course says, "Yeah, I don't like these guys," Valdor actually turns around and agrees with him. So from the very beginning we're getting these first rumbles of some tension between the factions of the Space Marines and the Custodes. Valdor eventually stops mucking about and brings him down. With Ushitan's dying words, he tells Valdor that he pities him, because while the Thunder Warriors were seen as failures, they still kept elements of their humanity throughout their lives, while Valdor and his Custodes have been mostly stripped of emotion and any element of free thought in the grand scheme of things. Ushitan would die free, while Valdor would live on as a puppet. With the coup put down, Valdor confronts the dazed Kandawire. Surprisingly, rather than kill her or imprison her, he simply exiles her under the condition that she never returns and must stay away from the Imperial Palace. Kandawire, of course, counts her blessings and heads out to live the peaceful life of a farmer away from the politics and those that might know her. Arguably a very good ending in the grand scheme of things. So I really like the character of Kandawire throughout this. She's a good example of a good character in a bad world. She's genuinely trying to do what she thinks is best. She's trying to uphold and enforce the law and enforce democracy, arguably for the people, and do what's best for them rather than just for herself, even if it means standing up to the guy who's just literally subjugated the planet, the guy who's made the laws and has just conquered the planet. Naive? Yes. But I like these optimistic characters that live in these very negative worlds and the little rays of hope that they bring. So I'm glad that she didn't meet a horrible end. As the credits roll, Malcador the Sigillite arrives, like Nick Fury for one of his mid-credit cameos. Who's Malcador? The Emperor's right-hand man, his confidant, trusted advisor, friend, father, son, pet? Anyway, Malcador informs us that the Emperor has foreseen this, or he just didn't trust Ammar, and had already backed up the hard drives with duplicates of Ammar's data, meaning that she died for nothing, and that the data was never really in trouble, and nothing was lost. Malcador also informs us that the Emperor, in his twisted sense of humour, has left the name of Ammar Astartes attached the still developing Space Marine project, which is why in present day Astartes is used as another name for Space Marines, which I'm sure makes her turn in her grave every time it's uttered. Malcador also reveals that a trace of the Space Marine Primarchs have been found scattered across the depths of space, and says that preparations for their recovery and the Great Crusade are almost ready. Then the credits roll. But wait, after the rest of the credits we also get a little epilogue of Kandawire living in peace with her old friend Afar on their little farm. So that was Valdor, Birth of the Imperium by Chris Wraight, a brilliant character piece and a really engaging story. It does a really good job setting up the direction of the Imperium, as well as the undertones of the Emperor's real ideals for humanity, overlaid by his public facade of democracy and unified order. At this point in time, it's made clear that things are very compartmentalised and need to know, with knowledge about rather important things just flat out being withheld. So, as a starting point for the Horus Heresy, or an expansive narrative in general, I say it works fine. It establishes that Terra is on the brink of unity and plans are well underway for the expansion to unite the other worlds humans inhabit. It paints a picture of both the Emperor and the would-be Imperium itself as not all it's publicly made out to be, and it really does show what it means to be a human in this futuristic world of supermen and wizards, and just how futile even the best of intentions from positions of power can be if you're not carrying the biggest stick. It establishes a brief glimpse of disdain held by Valdor for the Space Marines. Valdor himself has definitely done justice here, and allows the reader to understand his place in this world, and I really like the little glimpses of humanity we get, despite Ushatan claiming he's lost it, almost ironically giving him a warrior's death out of this weird form of guilt, I would argue, even though he definitely doesn't recognise it as such. I'm already aware that we will see Valdor again throughout the series, and I hope this element of humanity is expanded on, and if not, it will be interesting to see where these later books go with this supposition. And while I would like to see Kandawire again, I'm happy she's just counting her blessings and arguably leading a happier, simpler life, so maybe it's for the best if she doesn't pop up again. And I hear you asking, where was the Emperor during all of this? The moon? Elsewhere? Tesco's? Or maybe he'd gone to church. And there's just a little hint for the next video coming in my Law and Order series. Well, thank you for sitting through this, and enjoy the rest of your day. Goodbye.